All right. Hi, this is Dan Gwynn with Francis Schaeffer Studies, and it's my privilege to introduce you to another Francis Schaeffer Legacy Project interview. I'm here with Bryan Follis, and it's such a privilege. I've been waiting, really, honestly, Bryan, to meet you and to have this type of conversation with you. And I have to tell you that it's honestly been better meeting you than I even expected.
Well, that's very kind, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we've been a part of the Speaking the Truth with Love conference at Covenant Presbyterian Church in St. Louis. This particular congregation is the congregation of Francis Schaeffer that moved out from Union and Enright, that older church in town, and out to this area near Covenant Seminary. And so this congregation is still alive and flourishing and doing some very interesting and profound things, especially with their school. And so it's quite wonderful to hear all the things that they're doing here. And then so we just finished up this conference, and we had a lot of time to hear from Bryan about his book, Speaking the Truth. Help me out. With Love, the apologetics of Francis Schaeffer. So the benefit, I think, of your book, Bryan, is just that somebody is needed to sort out a lot of the material. And I found it very helpful in that respect, because there's just so much said about Francis Schaeffer's apologetic, also so much conjecture. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But before we do, I'd like to basically just give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your story, your testimony, and really how that eventually worked into this influence of Schaeffer and finally as apologetic.
Well, I'm a pastor in Northern Ireland, but certainly at one point that was something far from my mind. I wasn't a Christian. Through InterVarsity fellowship, doing a mission when I was a university student, they used a campus mission. They used Francis Schaeffer's Whatever Happened to the Human Race, and cumulatively over a number of days of watching the video, engaging with the discussion, I was really challenged with the worldview, a very Christian worldview I would have had. There was the presentations of Francis Schaeffer at lunchtime. There was gospel talks each evening, and by the Thursday, I was challenged and convicted, and came to a point of solid commitment to Christ. So, from my conversion, Francis Schaeffer has been integral to my walk as a Christian. So I came to faith through the ministry of Francis Schaeffer, and that's been a blessing to me. And then over a number of years, I was doing history and politics initially and work in that area. Then I began to read some of Schaeffer's work in spirituality, which opened up a whole new area. But my initial attraction was the apologetics and the worldview, and come from a history background, and his whole sweep. That was extremely attractive to me, and very helpful at challenging the views I held, which needed to be corrected and brought into line with Christ.
Fascinating. So this is interesting for me to hear this. So as a follow-up, I experienced something personally where I had got exposed to all of that, the outside apologetics, sort of as cultural apologetic that you talked about, the sweeping historical aspects, and then also all of the other things that he deals with, like existentialism and so on and so forth. And it opened up my mind to a whole lot of other areas of thought and study and research. I mean, I spent years, but the part that was missing for me was really true spirituality, to really understand Schaeffer properly. And so, would that happen with you?
Yeah, very well. And to me, before I became a Christian, Christianity was in the abstract. Schaeffer put it into real life, so that was really beneficial. A coherent philosophical approach to Christianity, which wasn't intellectually self-denying. But you can fossilize that, and perhaps I was in danger of doing that, of having that experience, having that knowledge, and keeping the way I had a historical knowledge. I had a genuine faith, but I was in danger of simply keeping it as a worldview. Then my career was taken off, and I was going up the career path, and perhaps in danger of drying up internally. And then I came across the letters of Francis Schaeffer, which were a real blessing to me. And from that into true spirituality, which really challenged me, again, in terms of maintaining that walk and intimacy with Christ. But secondly, it was a very helpful book pastorally. He deals with the reality of the fall,
Right.
and it helped me understand, even as a Christian, how you have a strong faith. Things aren't perfect. Attitude can't be perfect. Relationships mightn't be perfect. And so that is a great book which I've used in ministry, because it challenges us to have a personal reality, but it's also a pastorally helpful book.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been able to use it with individuals.
Yeah.
But that was a few years down the line. Like yourself, Dan, you were saying, you can come in the worldview, but then unless we bring the spiritual in. But of course, as we've talked about this conference, one of the wonderful things, the more you get into Schaeffer's writings, is to realise that the spirituality is the heart, and the apologetics flows from him. So while Schaeffer is best known for the trilogy of apologetics, it was his spiritual crisis, 1951. It's his writing, his personal letters, which I've studied, which really give you this glimpse of the heart and soul of the man, and this real hunger for intimacy with Christ, and the real desire to preserve that day by day, moment by moment.
Yeah. I think that says so much, because I know for me it was self-correcting. It's brought a lot of reason behind the apologetic. I mean, it's strange that you could be a believer and that you could have kind of this, you'd be awakened to the intellectual life of the mind, and that flourish, but then miss like the deeper aspects of your spiritual, kind of the undergirding that kind of makes sense of it. And so that sometimes I think happens over and over, at least in my experience.
I think that's one of the reasons why at this conference I've not so much denied or played down the apologetics. I wanted to avoid long talks on methodology, because sometimes we can have people attracted to methodology but are losing the spiritual intimacy and spiritual reality.
Right.
So I wanted to be clear about the methodology, clear about apologetics, but also to see it with the spirituality, the two sides of the one coin. And without the two sides, it's lacking.
Yeah, well, definitely want to dig into that, because I think that's so important. So how did all of this affect your life? I mean,
well, so I became a Christian. I then finished my degree. I had a career. And really when I began to get into sort of further readings on the spirituality, I was growing and really a new hunger and enthusiasm for Christian things. I was reading academically in Christian things, so I was building my mind up, my faith. I was revisiting Schaeffer's trilogy and his other works, and his other books, The Mark of the Christian, The Church for the Watching World. Really been challenged. If you are a Christian, if you've trusted in Christ, how do you live? Are you demonstrating spiritual reality? Are you mindful of people in your work, people, your neighbours? Are you really seeking to integrate faith, trust, and life and discipleship? And in all of that, that sort of spiritual renaissance, I don't want to call it a second blessing, because it was progressive, it was gradual, it was ongoing. It was less a second blessing, more a third and a fourth and a fifth blessing of progressive sanctification. To Schaeffer spoke, and I think what Schaeffer went through in his own life of faithful ministry and then running on empty, I think that's common to a lot of Christians. His was a more profound crisis, but his struggle, and from that struggle, the sense of spirituality which he outlines of drawing forth the fruit of the Spirit, I think speaks to many evangelicals, and has been a blessing repeatedly. And the longer I've been in ministry, where I see, so I'm sorry, I'm going off to your question. Ultimately, through all that development, I then realised I want to be more available to the Lord. So that resulted in me then resigning my job and training, and then being ordained and serving as a pastor in Northern Ireland.
oh, wow. So the one thing that you mentioned, I think, in covering that, I think just spurred some of my own thinking. It's something that's very precious to me about. So, and I don't think a lot of people, when they think about Schaeffer's apologetics, stop and think about just a couple of the words that are right in front of their face. So we talk about the trilogy, right? And there's the book, The God Who Is There.
Yes.
But what does that really mean to our faith? As apologists, even. So, I mean, isn't that a big issue?
And I think we want to take, and I think I want to stress again, Schaeffer's spiritual crisis, his spiritual renaissance, his emphasis on spirituality, leading from that into apologetics. So when he talks about the God who is there, it's never simply an argument. He's talking about real experience.
Exactly.
And sometimes if we come to Schaeffer only through the apologetics, as I did initially, that we're deficient. And that's why he himself said, you must read True Spirituality. If you don't experience L'Abri in terms of sense of community, read True Spirituality to balance. So it's like two tracks of a railway track going in the same direction. The rational, the apologetics, and the spiritual. Going parallel, and then L'Abri is the connection. That was the experience of, by prayer and by faith, with argument and discussion and debate, but also reliance upon the Holy Spirit. And I think you need those two aspects. So if you just read the God who is there, you can read it as a statement rather than drawn us to the God who is there.
Most definitely. So tell me about your life as a pastor. So how did that eventually lead into you writing the book?
Right, okay. So I've served in 3 churches, very distinct churches. My first where I was assistant was a large blue collar congregation. Then I worked in Erie University with university students, multicultural, and I'm now in a suburban church, which I suppose call a commuter village, predominantly upper middle class. So 3 very different social groups, but all of those I've sought to engage some of the insights which I've learned from Francis Schaeffer and apply them in terms of community, in terms of love, in terms of apologetics, engaging with people. Whether it's blue collar workers or university students, again, there's great insights which have helped. The book itself came out of my studies. I went back to be a university student again, did further work, and I did some work on Schaeffer because I was reading so much and I was finding Schaeffer attacked from many sides, and I kept thinking, actually, hold on, this is not actually true. And some of the books I was reading, some of the academics who were so critical of Schaeffer, I kept thinking, this is not the real person. And I had the opportunity before I went into training for the ministry to go to L'Abri in Switzerland 2 or 3 times, to go to English L'Abri, access to more tapes, access some of his letters at Swiss L'Abri. I thought, actually, when you see the heart and soul of the man, what is said of him in some of the secondary sources is completely unfair. And so I felt I'd done some more research in Schaeffer. I wanted to incorporate that as a publication and also to rebuff some of the other secondary critics.
Fascinating. Okay. That kind of leads me up to my next question then. Because anyone reading your book, they're going to note that you've done a considerable amount of research. The work in reading all those different materials, it struck me that because at the time there was a lot of those that were still on my reading list. And I'm like, it's taken me this long to get to them, and he's already got them, and yet at the same time even have worked through them. It's kind of profound, and also that in many cases you have kind of parsed a lot of that material and dealt with the kind of objective rebuttals of numerous of those misunderstandings of Schaeffer. And then almost at every point you're kind of navigating through those so carefully, and yet trying to still do it graciously and proceed toward the thought. To me that comes through.
Okay.
And then, but seemingly at almost every point you're dealing with that. Can you describe really what that was like writing that book, trying to, realizing that the material that you're working on may possibly be publicized and may eventually, be a contributing factor to Schaeffer's legacy?
Okay. What I wanted to do was try to stick as close as possible to primary sources, to go back to the real Schaeffer rather than deal with a second-hand or third-hand report by someone criticising Schaeffer. And what I discovered when I read the real Schaeffer and looked at spirituality, my own heart was warmed. As a Christian, I was encouraged. And so one of my reasons for writing the book was to encourage other Christians, be encouraged by Schaeffer. And there's a legacy here relevant to us post his own life, which can still be a blessing. So I wanted to be a positive affirmation and to make that whole inside of Schaeffer available. But secondly, I had to deal with some of the critics who could put people off reading Schaeffer. When I mentioned I did a book, people said, oh no, roll their eyes, not Schaeffer again, through this filter. And society changes, politics change. It's almost fashionable among some trendy evangelicals to criticise Francis Schaeffer, to blame him for the moral majority, to blame him for the Christian right, to blame him for anything they want to blame him for, to show up weak scholarship, bad scholarship, all the rest. The bottom line is Francis Schaeffer was working in full-time ministry. He had not just was preaching on a Sunday, he was again writing books for lectures, but he was given sacrificially of his time and effort in the early days, growing the very food. If the food didn't grow, there was no food on the table.
Mhm.
And so it's easy for some professors to look down on him, sitting in a university seminary office, who do their lectures and go home and forget about it.
Mhm.
But Schaeffer was opening his home, having guests in, practicing hospitality was difficult, and living it,
Yeah.
and writing in the spare moments.
Yeah.
And so that in itself, so if there is a gap here or there, it's not context, but here's a man who's experiencing it and practicing as an evangelist and as a pastor. And so I think some of the critics need to give him that break. But secondly, some of the critics have clearly never done their primary research. They're meant to be academics who make fun of Schaeffer, but they themselves haven't done the research.
Mm.
They haven't engaged the primary sources. They haven't considered the man in totality of his ministry, totality of his work.
Mhm.
And so I find among some of the critics shallow scholarship.
Yeah.
So people making fun of Schaeffer, they don't think people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Mhm.
I think they need to reflect upon how much of Schaeffer they've actually considered.
Yeah, I've encountered that a lot myself in several other books in particular. You're reading along and you feel like that they have a sense of a very cursory understanding of
Mhm.
Schaeffer, and then they've got a lot of their own material kind of soaking in and providing some history. So sometimes I will learn some things from them about the historical context maybe, or this or that. So, but a lot of times they'll find that in the final analysis they've not gotten Schaeffer
Yeah.
quite right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, what was the feedback you got on the book? I mean,
Some people are very upset. Some people thought it was, defense of Schaeffer, and some reviews were very complimentary, and some people were very kind in what they said. But certain people chose to simply reject it as pro-Schaeffer. But if they read the footnotes, if they read the research, I hope the work as a scholarship book stands for itself.
right. I think that's such a difficult thing. I mean, and you spend a considerable amount of time at
For a bit of
Liberty.
time, but you accept that as a project I wanted to do to be a blessing to Christians and also to put Schaeffer in proper context. But you realise that you're going to be criticised, academic, it can be jealousy. You have to accept that, but you do the right thing and you just give it in faith that the Lord can use it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as the scholars that I've talked to over the years always seem to say one thing repeatedly, that Schaeffer's spirituality is one thing that kind of, once you get into the depth of that, it becomes something that shines through and tends to make sense of a lot of these misunderstandings about him. Would you find that to be the case?
Absolutely, and I think some people who criticise the God who's there for too rationalistic, again, when you take that in context with true spirituality and what's going on at L'Abri, you see the total picture. But again, conscious of that some people weren't reading true spirituality, that's why in the later editions of the God who's there, shares that in the appendix, qualifying it, explaining the role of philosophy, that it's not the guiding principle, it's a tool being used. And so he was conscious of people misinterpreting it. But again, in his books, in the apologetics, they're based upon lectures he gave in the States, which in turn are based upon lectures he'd given 2 years earlier at L'Abri, which in turn are based upon discussions at L'Abri over several years.
So are you talking about the 74 lectures on spirituality?
No, I'm talking here
Those
about
particular,
the trilogy, the apologetics lectures.
Okay.
So they had emerged.
65?
Yeah, the ones in 65 had. There's November 63 at
Okay.
L'Abri, and almost word for word, those talks are, if you listen to the tape at Swiss L'Abri.
Okay.
So what becomes the book in 68, based upon the talk in 65, is in full form November 63, which has emerged from other discussions and lunchtime talks through the 50s.
Oh,
So
fascinating.
that's coming through in his discussions, and those are discussions while, for example, as mentioned this morning at the conference, his sermon in the chapel was different. It was straight exposition. So you can't hang a man on the one photograph.
Yeah.
You need to see the entire photographic album and the full story.
Yeah, most definitely. It's so, and we've covered a little bit of this. It often seems to me that people take different perspectives on Schaeffer, usually based off one or two things. So one being their entry point into Schaeffer's works, or two, rumors that they have heard about Schaeffer, maybe not even doing the work themselves, or there three, just a general lack of scholarship. And I find it sometimes just not only with scholars but also with just general people's perspective on Schaeffer. They kind of take something and just run with it, and then that's the position that they hold. It seems quite obvious to me that at times these persons writing, like you mentioned, may not have put in the amount of work either. And so, in what level, I guess, would you say you agree with that, or encounter that constantly?
Totally agree with that, Dan. I think a lot of people, it's a rumour, and they sort of, I use the phrase to hang the man, not on evidence, but on, it's a academic lynch mob based upon rumour. Or they do superficial academic research, or people come in and read the trilogy and nothing else, and don't go beyond the trilogy. And some fans of Schaeffer read the trilogy and don't go beyond it, and perhaps they do Schaeffer to the service because they then see Schaeffer only through the trilogy. But his critics who publicise it are the ones who pick the trilogy in isolation, and I think sometimes it's more deliberate than bad scholarship. I think his work on the authority of Scripture, his work in different areas, upsets a few people who want to tone things down. So if you want to discredit him with authority of Scripture, you discredit him as a rationalist and things like that.
Interesting, yeah. So in your talk with Mark Ryan, you mentioned truth and the significance of people, and dabbled into the question of Schaeffer's use of tension. And that was actually one of the questions I asked you about, well, you talked about taking the roof off, but tension, in my thinking, is that, really for our viewers here, is the non-believer's inability to live consistently with not only their worldview, but with their worldview with the world. I mean, that God's made. It just doesn't match with what God has made, and so therefore it's in conflict. And as early as the early Van Til Buswell debates, Schaeffer is mentioning this tension concept. So what were your discoveries on that?
Well, again, Schaeffer is a product of his time. He's drawn upon, I mean, he's been a student at Faith Seminary at Westminster, so Van Til has taught him for 2 years. But also Westminster was essentially set up. So Van Til had taken a presuppositional approach from the Dutch Reformed tradition. But he's also, as a Westminster, a successor to Princeton, and the B.B. Warfield, in the strong role of rationality, back to Scottish common sense philosophy. So Schaeffer, through Gresham Mackham, is drinking deeply from that. He's learning also from Van Til, and he's wanting both Buswell and Van Til to see points which can be used for the cause, for the gospel. What Schaeffer actually develops in many ways, he takes Van Til, as he trying to modify, but in later life, as he develops himself his own thinking, he's taken presuppositions. But if he takes some presuppositional apologetics, he can be in complete isolation. So he then takes Van Til, but says because the non-Christian can't live consistently, there is a point of tension, and that point of tension is our landing place, because they come onto God's territory, because they can't live the reality of the world as it is, and that's our point of contact, and that's where we make the contact and then begin to lift the roof to deconstruct their worldview. And again, a lot of kids today in their 20s couldn't care less. If you demonstrate that they don't live consistently, they'll shrug their shoulders, couldn't care less. But we want to say, you're not being true to yourself. You say one thing, you believe this is who you are, this is your identity, well then live it. Be true to yourself. And again, so changing the word slightly from Francis Schaeffer using his day up and consistent, I want to talk about being authentic, being true, and to show folks individually they're not being true to themselves, they're being false. And that can get under the skin, that can be a point of contact.
So that reminds me of Schaeffer's sermon and No Little People Walking Through the Mud. Remember that? It seems that is the amount of time that we need to take and invest really in translating the Christian worldview into the current context. And it's going to be a messy situation. But
and it takes time, it takes effort. And we need to keep praying for wisdom and for discernment. Wisdom for ourselves and wisdom for softness in terms of the illumination of the person we're speaking to.
Yeah. And what about areas in that where you're sometimes dealing with the irrational, or even let's even take it a step further, maybe even spiritual issues that are clouding judgment, clouding thinking.
Okay, I think again we need to be praying. I think we cannot, back to Schaeffer True Spirituality, we cannot underestimate the importance of doing all ministry in the power of the Spirit rather than the power of the flesh. So we want to be praying for illumination, for our own minds, for wisdom, as I've said, and illumination of the person receiving.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Romans 12, we pray and the Lord teaches for, the renewing of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
God has made us rational creatures in His image, so the mind's a point of entry. We want to connect with that. We want to sort of use a rational apologetics to connect with people, but constantly only God can convert the heart. Only God can save the soul.
So what you're describing is really a kind of a full-orbed
Yes.
approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just viewing Schaeffer's apologetics from like his cultural arguments,
No.
or just taking it maybe from his sort of presuppositional reductio ad absurdum type methodology or anything. It's addressing the person in front of you in
Yes.
every way possible.
Absolutely.
And
Emotionally, relationally, socially. So even the point I talked about little people, that's showing compassion. And we are to show compassion because it's right, but also in practice it's a very effective tool.
Mhm.
So as a point of contact, if people think we love them and we care for them, they're more likely to be open, willing to listen. So there's a relational dimension, but there's the rational dimension of the actual apologetics, and on top of that, the directly spiritual, we're praying for the work of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, something that comes to mind, and that is sometimes when I've taught true spirituality, I've explained what Schaeffer ends up doing in that book is giving us a sort of a living, breathing, cultural, or
Yes.
life
Yeah,
apologetic.
lived out,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Because it's like it's I don't know. For me, it was when I finally woke up to what he was doing. I was still. I mean, I'm reading along. I'm still hearing the same words that he's using elsewhere, even calling out some of the same worldview criticisms. But in the focus of spirituality, and it just started to really sink in that, okay, this is just not your normal approach. It's got some aspect of dealing with not just even a taboo methodology of approaching spirituality or getting rid of this or that thing like a lot of times we've been brought up on, but actually enabling us to have a real actual answer because we can truly understand who we are.
Yeah.
I think I woke up to his emphasis on the person and the cosmos as far as testifying.
And the point you serve it, knowing who we are. Schaeffer's apologetics involve philosophical argument, but it is essentially pastoral, giving people freedom, our identity, purpose. So it speaks to the whole person. And we live in an age which is very broken, with many damaged lives. And I think Schaeffer's approach, relational, as I've said, and emotional, rational, and spiritual, is really one of his insights for us in the present moment in time.
So incidentally, have you looked at Jerem's and Randall McCulley's
book,
Being Human?
One of the very early, it's one of the very early books.
Yeah.
Whenever Jerem worked in English library, and a wonderful publication.
Because it seemed like that in some ways it's related. It's very much. It's almost like it's an updated version of the content.
Yeah, very much so.
Fascinating.
And a really quite a prophetic book given its time.
Yeah.
Published in the 70s.
Very good. Well, so earlier when asked about the works of Schaeffer's corpus that you would recommend, it's kind of essential. You mentioned Schaeffer's letters and True Spirituality, but I mean, as we've talked here, it's important really to I think also address the trilogy. But why would you say True Spirituality and in Schaeffer's letters first.
If you're going to look at the trilogy and use that, I think there's a danger that you can look at it in a pure historical context. I see it as methodology to learn off, and in that case some of it is dated. But if you go to true spirituality, you're seeing the heart of the man. If you see his letters, you're seeing his compassion for individual people. When you have that, you understand the heart of Francis Schaeffer. Then when you turn, and you should, in history I did mention the trilogy, but that is what we should lead to. Then lead into that to understand how he used that insight, how he used that compassion, because the compassion led him to understand the culture around him.
Yeah.
He wanted to, I mentioned we have the truth in Christ, but we're called to share that truth. And what the trilogy were his attempts to communicate Christianity in accessible ways to people beyond the institutional church, and to reassure Christians in the church actually that this is coherent.
Oh, yeah.
But it flows from his experience of Christ, it flows from his spirituality, and it flows from his compassion for ordinary people.
Definitely. Now, a lot of times I'm asked that question, and I've asked other scholars this question too. One of the I'm trying to think of a scholar emeritus that at Covenant that I asked, and I'm drawing a blank right now. But I asked him, and he said, "Read True Spirituality and the God Who Is There at the same time."
Yes, perfect, very good.
So,
Are you going to add in the mark of the Christian, the church for the watching world? You know, those are, again, to make us think evangelistically, that in terms of how we live and how we conduct ourselves.
Very good. So, but sometimes when I am asked that question, I'm usually addressing True Spirituality, but I also mentioned two other works, Edith's book, Labrie,
Yes.
mostly because Schaeffer, in his, he has an article, How I Came to Write My Books, and so he mentions really kind of how his book is sort of formed, and True Spirituality is center, but then there's also Edith's book over here, and so then but then the trilogy is the hub, kind of, so this wheel kind of approach.
Well, her book, Labrie itself, I think people should read that, simply for again to glimpse the sense of the supernatural, of looking to God in faith, looking to God in prayer, and not to be embarrassed to say we live in a supernatural universe, a God who's at work. And so it's not just a wee story of, this is how we lived, it's a story of God and God's existence being demonstrated.
Yeah.
And that, again, is important.
I think, it is truly profound, the life of prayer that they were living in front of people. I could only imagine some of the things that they were praying for, and actually people sitting there and then being fulfilled within a couple of days.
And different students who were in the 60s and the 50s when there was no food coming in, and they were praying for money and praying for food, and these students who come from Lysandra, they're thinking, we're eating them out of house and home all of their food, and then to realise that God has provided. For people come from an unchurched background or from a very comfortable background, and to see that reliance, humble reliance upon God, had a profound impact. So there's the discussions, there is the intellectual, there's the prayer, and then there's the provision, and that spoke at all levels to the visitors.
That's interesting. Now, I'm also interested in your thoughts in relation to works on his article, "The Secret of the Power of the Enjoyment of the Lord," which is very similar in content to The Mark of a Christian, which you mentioned. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, a good book, and again, when I mentioned history of the letters and True Spirituality, that was a starting point. But then keep reading into the trilogy, into Labrie, into the different things, and somebody may go off in a different direction to creativity, his works in literature, archaeological issues. Those are all different things, but True Spirituality as a point of entry.
Yeah, that's good. I think it's one of those things with so many different works and so many different possibilities, but in general, those are really powerful. I love that you emphasize the letters, because sometimes the letters get forgotten. They're sort of they're not in the complete works, and they're sort of on the side. Langton Dennis did this incredible job of putting that all together, but everything that we're dealing with right now is in there.
Those letters, it's the one book, plus True Spirituality, I would read time after time. And whenever I was preparing to come to the States, I was really busy in home ministry, but I took an afternoon to simply reread the letters and to pray through, and not prepare my talks for here, but simply to reread Schaeffer, his own experience and his compassion. And I spent about 3 hours just reading it and praying. And the one thing came through to me very profoundly, challenging my own heart, was his compassion for individual people. So the letters, not to read cover to cover, but to read it reflectively, prayerfully. God will use it still very much. It's written 50 years ago, 60 years ago, but there's much in it to be a blessing to us today as individual Christians.
Exactly. Well, in reflection of his compassion, we know that one of the things Schaeffer felt very strongly about is not being mechanical in our approach to people and our evangelism or our apologetics. He was against those kind of methods, yet at the same time, he did have an approach, right? I mean, if you were to describe that in like 5 points or whatever.
Well, first of all, patience. He listened. It's very easy as a pastor to want to keep talking. He listened. So he allowed people to come. So it's not a point of engagement, but before he even engaged, he listened to people. Then he's asking who they are, where they're from. So there's an interest, that compassion for the person leads in where you're from, what are you about. He's not asking persons in the first 5 minutes, what do you believe, and going through, but he's engaging with the person, he's unpacking the person, he's drawing the person in, he's inviting the person to share something of themselves, and the process of which he's drawn out their values. Nobody believes in nothing. Everyone believes in something. We may say if someone's not a Christian, he's a non-believer. In some ways it's a bad phrase, because it implies he's a rationalist, he believes nothing or whatever. But everyone believes something. And Schaeffer's great approach was to draw out what to believe, and then to, again, as we discussed earlier, find that point of contact by showing how they're inconsistent or not being authentic, and to begin to, at the point of tension, and to lift the roof. But those weren't bump, 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 bump. That is meals, that is a walk, that is relationships, that is compassion, that is time. It may have been one day, it may have been over a week, it may have been 5 repeated weekend visits, but he's moving people on who feel safe, who know that he cares about them, that he's interested in them as a person. He's not just doing it to add another number to his tally of conversions, and then he's sharing the gospel.
Yeah.
And the gospel is the application. At that point, from drawing the person in, their values, and then combating those values, and then consistent with the values, that is those difficult moves. But once he always did, he didn't simply just love people and leave it there. He then shared where they were wrong and why they ultimately needed the gospel of Christ.
So that bringing them around to truth, he mentions at least once or twice that that you hate to do it sometimes.
Yes.
His compassion, but also I think his acquaintance with their struggle.
Yes.
Can you describe what you picked up?
What he meant was, you have someone for a meal, you can discuss the weather, you can discuss the arts, you can discuss philosophy, you can discuss Christianity in the abstract. But when you say, but you need Christ, or your views are incoherent, that's going to be upsetting to people. Even if you're not directly offensive or confrontational, they can feel challenged, they can be offended, they can be distressed. And because he was compassionate, it cost him to challenge people. He's not simply been belligerent. There are some people you come across in ministry, some Christians, who seem to love arguments and love offending other people. It cost Schaeffer to challenge people. And one of the things he described it, explained it, he said it's like the old style of a revivalist preacher. People come to church happy, a little service. When he preaches judgment, he preaches hell, if they don't respond, they go out feeling more depressed than they came into church. But you have to preach that they're aware of the dangers and have a chance to respond. And so Schaeffer wanted to lift the lid, and he used the imagery, when you lift the lid, you expose the people to the wind and to the elements, and that's unpleasant. And we can only do that because love compels us. And that is why, back to true spirituality and compassion, that was his foundation, that was his motivation, rather than simply wanting to have points of 35 people converted this month. It is compassion for the individual.
So in the current time, the current setting which we're in, how relevant do you think Schaeffer is?
I think Schaeffer's very relevant. provided that is the caveat, we don't fossilise the exact methodology or the particular answers he give at moments in time. I think we need to be very careful of that. But we now live in an age where people dispute the very nature of truth. We live in an age where people aren't interested in philosophical discussion, we're told. But back to Schaeffer's true spirituality, we have to be living that. We have to be bringing forth the fruit of the Spirit of loving our neighbour as ourselves. We have to give a demonstration of God's love, and that is spot on. Before anyone will listen to our claim to have the truth, we have to live the truth. And if we're living the truth and we're engaged in the truth, that will challenge people who don't believe in the concept of truth. And then we're seeking to share the truth with those people. And that's why I think his apologetics of drawing people in, but it's a spirituality of living in a way that honours other people, that demonstrates God's existence, that is really relevant to us in 2019.
And then, just to follow up with that, I mean, you mentioned drawing people in, but there's a difference in how Schaeffer was talking about doing that. There's an earnestness and respect for who they are as created in the image of God. Talk about that, please.
I like the phrase Schaeffer uses, nobody's less than zero. So somebody may have been of no social significance in society, they may be antagonistical in their views, you may find them difficult to discuss with them, but they're not nothing. They're made in the image of God. And because they're made in the image of God, they're worthy of dignity, but they're also worthy of the love and the truth of Christ. And so, as I used the phrase earlier, in Paul's business, God's love compels us. It's a desire to see them rescued and liberated. And for us today, that's where our motivation should be. Not to grow the church, not to grow our club, not to grow our side, but to see people from darkness brought to light in Christ.
Well, Dr.
Thank
Follis,
you very much,
so
and
much.
thank you for your time.
It's been
And
wonderful.
I trust this has been helpful, or interesting at least, and it's been great meeting yourself, and been made more of your own ministry, and every blessing to that for the future.
Thank you, man. All right.